Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Lachlan podcast of What About Cole. We're now going to proceed on to the Vuelta Burgos Feminas 2021 stages 1 and 2 recap. Stage 1 was yesterday, but to be honest, there was only 15 kilometers of live coverage and it finished just before the end of the Giro, so we thought we'd bundle it together whilst this boring Giro stage is happening, and Benji and I can do stages 1 and 2 together. We just finished watching stage 2. Stage 1 first, from Villa Diego to Sargentes de la Lora, 100 kilometers long. These are some interesting parcours in Burgos. If you are maybe a bit skeptical about women's racing, think it plays out the same way every time, I'd encourage you to go and look at these two first stages and the parcours of this week. We have a proper mountaintop finish. We have rolly parcours, balanced parcours, not just a punchy 1 kilometer climb at the end. I really like what they've done here with the parcours. This stage, 100 Ks, rolling climbs, 2Ks 4.2%, 1.7Ks 5.2%. The main action start is really the last 10 Ks. There's the Alto de la Lora, 4Ks at 6%. It then crests with 7 Ks to go, about 6 Ks to go, and then they have a 2 to 3% drag up to about 1,000 meters altitude. So not a nailed-on race for the pure climbers like Cecilia Ludwig, Van der Breggen, or Van Vleuten, who are all in attendance. This is a World Tour level race, unlike the men's race. But Emily Dietrichson, Benji, I mean, she's moved over to Trek Segafredo and she got on the break early before coverage started. What do you think, if you were her, what would you be planning on doing? Just trying to get some form back in the legs? Is that why she's attacking early on a stage that doesn't suit her too much, former world champion?
Honestly, I'm guessing that she hasn't had the best period on the bike recently, and I think she's trying to figure out how she can get into a form that she can compete in pretty soon again. And I think that going to races is one part of that, but being active in those races improves that as well, and it shows herself for the team as well. So I think that's a bit of an improvement too, compared to a few of the races she's done before. And I think that in this stage, waiting is not really something she can do unless she will end up being a rider that will be domestique on the last climb. I'm not sure that was in the plans of the team, so she decided to go early with a bit of an attack. And, she didn't last too long because I think that she actually got caught and we had another attack. Shirin van Androoy also going into the attack. I think she's a cyclocrosser, if I recall correctly. And she tried to build out a bit of a gap on this stage as well. But to be fair, like with a finish like that, I think that it was clear that by the end, if one rider is in the breakaway, some team will take care of it. It's not like they have multiple teams in the breakaway, meaning that there's more teams in the break than in the chasing group, for example, trying to close down a gap. So not the case here with a single attacker, and that offered an opportunity for the chasing peloton to catch Shirin van Androoy by the time they got to the Alto de la Lora, the final climb, really. And I think it was Bike Exchange taking control, right?
Yeah, it was. They were pacing. I thought for Amanda Spratt, their climber here, we also had, I think, Soraya Paladin chasing for a little bit. We had Shapira doing work for Kasia Niewiadoma. So I was thinking, okay, this is going to be kind of like a Liège-style climb. We're going to see Niewiadoma under Van der Breggen and Vollering going clear and Van Vleuten attacking. But this is different because we have a proper mountaintop finish at the end of this stage race. I think that is affecting how this race has been ridden and made it different to the other races. And there was basically inaction on this final, the main part of the climb, the climbing part. Van der Breggen accelerated, couldn't really get any purchase. She had everybody right on her wheel, huge group. It hadn't been that hard of a stage beforehand, and she basically eased up. They get to the crest of the climb, big group, and Grace Brown on Bike Exchange attack. Now, we think of her as a classics rider, she's good in the, I feel like Brabantse Pijl is perfect for her. I think Liège, she's good in Liège, but she's not a contender for Flesh. And I mean, I think she won Drie Daxa or Brugge de Panel. She won a flat race as well.
Correct.
She's a good late attacker, and she's attacked just when it's leveled off, 2-3%, a really annoying gradient, perfect for a strong rider like her. And she's joined by Elise Chabi, who I believe is the Swiss national champion on Canyon SRAM. So yes. Niewiadoma has a rider in the break. Grace Brown, in the break, meaning that Amanda Spratt has a rider in the break, and Niamh Fisher-Black, the strong young Kiwi on SD Works, gets in there as well. So SD Works, the strongest all-around team, have a rider in the break, which means the team's missing out Trek and Live Racing out of the main strong teams, and Movistar with Van Vleuten, but she didn't have too many teammates up there. And we're used to, Benji, I think, the favourites always winning in the women's races. We're so used to Van der Breggen and Van Vleuten being there. We're like, oh, well, one of them, or it could be a sprint with Vollering, could win. But the front three were just too strong. If you were SD Works, it's tough. I know it's good on paper to have Niamh Fisher-Black there, but is she ever a chance to win the sprint? And I know she was sitting on. Would you have started chasing a little bit at some point with SD Works to keep the pressure on if it looked like they weren't going to bring them back? Or would you have just allowed it to play out as it did?
Good question, actually. I think that it's an interesting concept because the
Would you
riders
have her
that attack, first of all, like the riders that attack, Grace Brown, we're talking about her, but I think that she's actually chosen the place of her attack perfectly, because I think if she attacked on the climbing aspect, she's going to have much more trouble to create the gap initially, while on the plateau section on top, the false flat section on top, she can use her rouleur skills because she's better at that and one of the better riders at that in total, to be honest. And she can make that move roughly just after the top, which means that she's got that advantage over the potential domestique climbers that were still climbing in the peloton. Shabby on that wheel indeed. That's also a rider that has been working a lot for her teammates in a recent period. So Fisher-Black has been in the attack a few times, also working a lot for their team. Perhaps this is kind of a way for the teams to give the riders that are in all the classics working for their leader a bit of a chance on a stage win here, because I think that the difference on this climb wasn't going to be insane either. It was a false flat section to the line, basically. And we still had a Trek and so forth that were still setting up a tempo in that second group, the ones that missed out, Taylor Wiles for Trek, for example, which means that they can benefit from those other teams doing things. Trek is taking it on anyway, so do they need to put an extra woman in that train at the front to try and catch back their own rider? I think that's meh. I think that they...
Especially in a stage race.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it was a good choice, what they did, to just leave it going.
You're right. As Benji said, Shabby and Niamh Fisher-Black. Shabby was in like suicide breaks in Liège or Flèche, I think, forcing other teams to chase. So she put in work there. Niamh Fisher-Black worked in those same races, chasing back breaks, denying herself the opportunities. 2Ks to go. They have a 10-second gap. They'd actually held that very stable at 10 seconds. The domestiques behind for Trekco weren't strong enough. And we got into the last K. It's 12 seconds. They finished any real climbing. It's basically 2%. You can't even see it really going uphill on the TV. And we're thinking, who's going to win? Grace Brown has been doing the bulk of the work, it has to be said. I think Shabby helping her a bit, and Niamh Fisher-Black sitting on quite a lot. And Grace Brown opened up this sprint really, really early. It's actually quite an visually appealing sprint. Yep. They're on a plateau. There's this one long road through a field, no trees, on up at 1,000 meters altitude to this lone village. This one like brown road, and it's really quite wide. And you see Brown just open it up. It's kind of like stage 5 of the Dauphiné, Benji, like that one road onto the airstrip last year. And Brown opens it up early and she gaps Shabby off the wheel. And we can see it's already done. The strongest of those riders. And yeah, she just wanted to go for a long sprint and she was way stronger. She's been incredible this year, Grace Brown. I think she's one of the superstars. I sort of am putting her up on the level of the other, Nivea Doma. And she's different in different sort of races, but she is, I think, a superstar, Grace Brown, and Pike Exchange realised that now as well, giving her a lot of opportunities ahead of Sarah Roy earlier this year, which was good from them. But here's the full results from stage 1 of Vuelta Burgos Feminas. Brown first, Shabby second, Niamh Fisher-Black all at the same time. Big group comes in second. Arlenis Sierra winning the group bunch sprint. Soraya Paladin 5th, Bertizzolo 6th, Longo Borghini 7th, Vollering, Numanova, Van Vleuten 10th. So in terms of GC, Brown went into the leader's jersey, which I'm pretty sure is purple as well, Benji. Like, as if we needed any more purple, but I mean, Burgos had it first. And yeah, GC was that same order. It seemed no bonus seconds changed it. So yeah, any big takeaways from that stage, Benji? Do you like the parcours design? Did you think it made more interesting racing rather than finishing at the end of the climb proper?
I think it indeed made for interesting racing because this offers an opportunity for those kind of rollers like Grace Brown to have an opportunity at the stage, because otherwise you're just going to see Van Vleuten and so forth smash it on the uphill section until the line. So this plays more for more tactical stuff. You could also have seen attackers, real climbers attack on the climbing section and then rollers trying to catch up. Yeah, it could have been a very different race if some other tactics were involved, but it looked like Grace Brown was setting it up for herself with the team entirely. And that move was quite well timed, and there was no imminent response outside of those two riders that were with her. And I think that all in all, a good victory for her. Whether she's a superstar in the women's cycling, I think that she's definitely near that. I think that currently the superstars in women's cycling are mostly Dutch at the moment. And I think that Grace Brown has the qualities, but indeed is a very different rider. She's got that ruler capability, which means that on races like Liège, when you said earlier, she has to make the early move, because on the climbing sections, she might not be able to follow an attack by Van Vleuten or a Longo Borghini. So she needs to anticipate moves and work with that. If she can hang on the climbs, then she can make a move on top, like we saw on this first stage. So really interesting rider, really interesting how her tactics will play out.
Okay, but yeah, something to watch. I feel like there's some races she could definitely go for GC and be a big contender, especially given the lack of longer climbs in women's cycling. But that was stage one. Here's the stage two profile from Pedrosa de Valdepores to Villarcayo, 97 Ks long. Again, no mountaintop or hilltop finish, but we do have some climbs which should be decisive. We have the Alto de Bocos, 2.5 Ks at 6.7%, rolly course, then for about 50 kilometers. And then the last main climb of the day is the Alto Retuerta, says 3.3 Ks at 5%, but that's a lie. The climb is much longer. The climbing section is just uncategorized, the first half of it. And you also, that average gradient is a lie. The first kilometer averages 6.5%. Then it's pretty much flat, false flat for 1.5 Ks. Then they do 10.2% for 500 meters, then 7.3% for 500 meters. So there's a steep kick at the end of this climb. Then downhill descent, 22 kilometers to the finish. The question would be, could the sprinters that we have here make it over this? Diedrichsen, probably not. Sierra, who's that rider that won the bunch sprint, Benji? Sierra. Could she make it over? Would Demi Vollering be fine? You presume she would. So it'd be interesting to see where it played out. Would we get a big attack from Anna van der Breggen? But how did the stage kick off, and when did live coverage start?
Well, live coverage started with 3 riders in the breakaway. Anastasia Chursina from Ale. We've got Heidi Franz from Rally, and also Antri Christoforu. I ruined that name. Christoforu, my bad.
How does it feel, buddy?
Yeah. Rubbing it in. I think that the most important aspect here is that Chursina was 1 minute 43 behind in GC going into the stage. So whether that breakaway makes it might influence that as well. But she had a bit of an issue. In the uphill section, she was able to drop the people that she was with relatively easily, because we saw that on that last ascent. But then in the descent, she tends to ride very slowly, pretty fearfully actually, and also in cornering as well, very noticeable. And that causes Heidi Franz, who was with her earlier but got dropped on the climb, to actually come back to her and basically drop her again for a tiny bit until the climbing starts again, where she catches up again. So really interesting dynamic where a rider has to anticipate her weakness by attacking on the climbing section to make sure that she can actually take a bit of loss in the descent, because she's just not an amazing descender, right?
Horrific. Yeah, bad. Really bad in the descent. And Heidi Franz is flying past her and probably needed to go even quicker to try, because once they hit, every time they went uphill, Carcina was so quick. And yeah, I think it just shows there's sometimes a bigger difference in descending ability within the women's peloton as well. Same team, Ale as Corsina is Mavi Garcia. We saw that in Strada Bianca 2020 when she was in a group of two with Van Vleuten at the end. Van Vleuten was putting her under pressure on every descent, and she'd have to do more work to close it. But it didn't really matter too much for Corsina. She was just that much stronger than Heidi Franz uphill. Behind, we have no SD Works represented up front. None of the main teams are represented going for GC. So we have the peloton being paced by Anna van der Breggen on the hill. And the gap's at 120, 18 Ks to go. We're coming up to this nasty hill. I'm thinking this is going to be a big GC day, and there should be a big shake-up on GC. And it looked like that might happen. We had SD Works in full force with Van der Breggen attacking on the climb, but she again brought the whole peloton with her. And then, sorry, we don't have the exact details because the coverage completely cut out, unfortunately, on the steep section of that climb, the coverage of the GC group. We could just see the break, but we could see Nivea Doma countered. It just looked like all those riders were countering. I think going into one of the corners, Benji, ELB got caught up in a crash. There's a corner where Van der Breggen was coming in. She's about to start her attack. She gets front wheels. She got Vollering like fourth wheel. ELB's too far behind. She gets caught behind a crash from one of the purples, and that messes up her plans early. But it's a big group, and the group all comes back together mainly because after they sort of then got the group of favourites, names you'll typically see, Nivea Doma, Moolman, Fisher Black, Mavi Garcia, Van der Breggen, Van Vleuten, Vollering. So SD Works got the big numbers, and SD Works started attacking. It was just a weird order, Benji, because I thought at that point that they were going to get paced by Van der Breggen for the Vollering sprint and maybe use Fisher Black as well. Were you surprised they attacked, given that they definitely had the quickest rider in that group?
Well, certainly, because I think that group was thinned down a lot on the climbing section by Van der Breggen pacing, by those attacks you mentioned.
No climbs left.
Indeed, no climbs left afterwards, which means that if you hammer it on this climb with this group, and if you continue that going, because they've got those four riders, Fisher Black, Van der Breggen, Vollering, and also Moolman in the group, I think you can spare at least Moolman as a domestique there. Well, not spare her, but use her as a domestique there, because I think that she's likely the one that is least expected to win this overall. Well, imagine if I jinx it and she wins in a few days, but I think that that's on paper.
Oh no, I wouldn't have burnt her. I think she could go well on Lagunas de Neila. I'm not sure. Yeah,
true.
She could podium GC. I would have burnt Neve Fisher Black straight away.
Yeah, but I was thinking about the 5 seconds she had in GC, but that's not worth it at all to discuss that. She should be riding indeed. I think that was the team that I expected to make the pacing, and they did some attacks. Then at a certain point, one of them went to the front and just hammered it in a bit of a pacing section, and they didn't really get too much close. I think 120 was the closest they got, 115, and once that was there, we saw a bit of a downhill section again, and Trisina was not really going that fast in it, but that group looked like they were stopping the pacing again, and I think that Mavi Garcia at a certain point was first in that group, and yeah, it's a teammate of the one up front. She's not going to be pacing in that group. So I think great move by Mavi Garcia, moving herself in there, trying to stop the pacing that was going on. And it did work because the tempo really slowed down. We saw the gap opening up to 154 at a certain point, which means if it's 12K to go with 154, it's going to be difficult to catch that rider, I'd expect. Even if it's a one solo rider, I still believe Trisina could do it because she's also got a decent time trial, if I recall correctly, from her history.
Yeah.
So
and no more technical descending. It was kind of falls flat downhill where you just need to. She slapped it in a big gear and was just smashing it. I should mention Grace Brown had been dropped on the climb, so she was losing. She was like a minute 30 behind, so she would be losing the jersey today. I was still surprised, and I think it's because of Lagunas de Neila coming up. SD Works was so ambivalent to the stage and to, I guess, keeping the pressure on. I think the reason was they had all the other GC contenders in that group. So, like, they might have been setting up a Van Vleuten attack or something like that. I mean, if they'd gapped Van Vleuten, if they'd gapped Nivea Doma, maybe then they just pace. But because they had those riders there, they thought it's not worth it just for a Burgos stage win. Hopefully the other teams can take it up. So basically Cercina just kept going, and this is probably the biggest upset. I think the biggest upset victory in Women's World Tour this year by far. When you look at the type of winners we've had, which is Van der Breggen, Van Vleuten, I think did Emma Norsgaard win a Women's World Tour race? It's been very similar names, and she is, I think, this is her first World Tour win, and it's her biggest win by far.
Yep.
I think she hasn't won since. Check her wins. She hasn't won since like 2017, and yeah, so huge win for her. And I guess it's just because of the parcours and because this is a stage race, and there just aren't as many women's stage races like this. So it's good to see, and she was incredibly strong today. Behind in the group, it just was a massive group and a reduced bunch, or just a bunch sprint for second. Alice Barnes winning that sprint ahead of Diedrichsen, who's looking a little better the last couple of days compared to last year. Sierra coming fourth, Alonso Tomasi Duval, Erich Vollering and Lynette making up the top 10. Now, trying to get the revised GC rankings for you, I believe Elise Shabby has gone into the leader's jersey because she made it into that first group, and she had that 5-second lead from coming second on the stage yesterday. So she's in the leader's jersey at the moment. Doesn't necessarily mean she's a favourite for this race at all. Tomorrow's stage, another interesting parcours from Medina de Pomar to Ojo Guarena, 117 k's long, rolly, no real climbs for the first 90 k's. Then they did the Alto de las Ollas, 3.3 k's, 5.9%. Then they got a false summit, and then they got a little bit more climbing on a ridge, descent, 3.3 k's, 4% climb, which crests with about 8 k's to go, then a descent, and then an uphill kick at the end, which is about 1.5 k's long. I don't have the exact gradients of that finish for you, but it looks it's at least 5% from what I can see eyeballing it. The other climbs are 6%, pretty regular, and Guarena has some steep sections in it too. It'd be an interesting stage. How do you see it playing out, Benji? Do you see someone who's a non-GC threat going on that last 3.3k climb and being allowed a leash from the sort of SD Works teams? By the way, the final climb, 1.2k is 5%, so I was correct. Yeah, how do you see it playing out tomorrow?
Well, with a bit of context, on the fourth stage, we have the Lagunas de Neila climb, which is 11 kilometers of climbing at 6.3%, which means that on this stage, I don't expect the biggest GC differences yet. Personally, I think that
it's a fake news climb too.
Yeah,
must be said.
That's true. I think that
last 3Ks, 11%, 10%.
Yeah, which means that on stage 3, I think that we don't have the biggest GC threats. I think that this might be a stage where we again see a smaller group, like a three-woman group on that 3.3 kilometer section just right away with a few people from different teams, perhaps a rider from Trek, a rider from Liv, a rider from SD Works, which means that those teams won't be pacing, and if those are in front, then good luck getting them back because you'll need quite a few people to catch that. Is someone going to hammer the Alto? It's a bad day for me.
Alto de las
Ollas. Yes.
I live in Europe, mate. I can pronounce Spanish words now.
Damn it. I think on that climb,
I don't think they will. I
don't think so either. So I don't expect the craziest GC differences. I think that we either see a smaller group going to the line or we see a bit of an uphill sprint going on, personally.
I think Brown will go again because she's no threat on GC. She's going to get spat on Lagunas de Neila. Like those last 3Ks, that's the climb, by the way, the Ivan Sosa climb. He wins the stage every time. He wasn't even a GC threat last year. Him and Remco and Lando were on that climb. It's steep, that climb. There's 16% section. So Brown's not a GC threat, but she's strong enough to gap everybody and go through with it. I think Mavi Garcia should be trying to go clear too. I don't see her climbing being good enough on that climb either. She should try. She might get too much respect, though, from the peloton to be allowed to go. Taylor Wills, strong rider. I think she could be a good option. Is Demi Vollering? She's not good enough at climbing to be a GC threat, is she, Benji, on that sort of climb? Like Liège, she was just hanging on.
Yeah, I think Lagunas de Neila is going to be too troublesome for her. Definitely when someone like Van Vleuten hammers it, or or
Ludwig. Like we never see we spoke to Cecilia Uttrup Ludwig about this. She's very small, pure climber, and never
Yeah,
gets pure climbs. Tomorrow, stage 4, like could be the sort of stage for her.
I think so as well. I think it fits her. I think that she's definitely one of the most fitting candidates. Trying to look through the other teams to figure out one candidate. In another team, I think you mentioned Moan Pasio last time, I think, for stage 4.
Yeah,
So that's definitely an option as well. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a good race. We're going to see an overview of who is good at these kind of climbs
I
in
can't wait.
tomorrow's stage. I can't wait either. We don't have this option too much in the season that we get such a climb at the end of the stage. So very much looking forward to it.
It's on GCN Race Pass if you want to watch the Vuelta Burgos. I'm not sure which locations, but I assume quite a lot of them, and probably most of them outside of Spain. So I'd encourage you to go and watch the Vuelta Burgos. About an hour and 10 minutes of coverage every day, and they pretty much just have the juicy bits in the last 30K. So well worth your time, particularly on a snoozy Giro stage like today. So if you don't want to watch the Giro stage, I'd encourage you to go and watch the last sort of 10, 15Ks of Burgos stage 2 and stage 1. We hope you enjoyed that recap and the podcast today, and we'll see you with the recaps of the stages tomorrow. Ciao.